Hi, I'm Cindy, and I am back with you with another writing video. This video is going to be on some basic tips on writing dialogue. Dialogue is one of the more challenging aspects to get right in a novel. Not only must the dialogue move your story along by revealing important details, but must be punctuated correctly as well. Dialogue provides valuable insight into the souls of your characters. As in real life, we learn things about them through their speaking as well as through the things left unsaid. Here are some basic and oh so important rules for writing the dialogue in your story. You may be familiar with some or many of these, but it's always good to review now and again. To begin with, dialogue should be written fairly tightly without excess words. Otherwise, the pacing might be affected. Remember that there will be times when the reader will hear only one side of a conversation, as when the character is talking on the telephone. There is usually no need to tell the reader who is on the phone or what is being discussed, at least not every time. Allow the reader to discover these details through the side of the conversation as heard through the point of view character. Every time that the speaker changes throughout the dialogue, a new paragraph must begin, and that is true even if the speaker has only one word of dialogue. Every paragraph must be indented, the exception being where the dialogue begins a new chapter or follows a scene break. If the speaker is quoting someone else's words, a single quotation is used, and all punctuation for what is said belongs inside the quotation marks, while the dialogue tags belong outside of the quotation marks and separated by a comma. Action beats can be used to replace some of the dialogue tags to add a little spice and variety, but they should ideally be action beats that either flesh out the character, flesh out the scene, or in some way move the story along. Also, they shouldn't be overly flowery. They should be used sparingly, just enough to add spice. I find that dialogue tags can be used less often as long as each speaker has a clearly defined new paragraph, which is only to repeat and to reinforce what I said earlier. Each speaker gets a new paragraph. The last thing you want as a writer is to distract the reader with overused tags. A distracted reader will put the book down and might not buy the next. Um, Usually it's enough to say he said and she said. That is often enough. But what we don't want to do is have a lot of unnecessary adverbs and adjectives or um, ornate and overly picturesque speech. And when you're writing dialogue, you want it to be real, as authentic as a conversation you might have with a colleague, a friend, or family member. If the dialogue ends with an ellipsis, no additional punctuation is needed, just the end quotes. If the character is interrupted while speaking, you use the em dash. For my own writing, I don't often use either the ellipsis or the em dash. I use them very rare, if at all. I personally find that the use of either of them makes my dialogue less effective. If the character's speech goes on for several paragraphs, the quotation marks belong at the start of each new paragraph and not at the end for as long as the speaker remains the same. Within a novel, dialogue is used in the story to reveal important information, but not for small talk. It is very tempting to just have your characters chatting about nothing. Their pets, the weather, but you've got to keep the story's got to be moving. When writing dialogue, it is extremely helpful to read the dialogue out loud as you write. It really helps create resonance and allows you as the writer to hear the dialogue as the reader. When I'm reading a book, I will often read the prose silently, but read the dialogue out loud. I've always done it that way. I don't know why. If the character is speaking internally and not to another character, italics are used to indicate internal monologue and thoughts. It's important to always be sure to have a unique voice for each of your characters and allow the reader to discover the character through the use of that voice. Some characters may be more verbose and others will be brief. Allow your characters their natural speech pattern. But remember that your characters may not use the same exact speech pattern in every scene, much like real life. People talk differently when they get excited, differently again if they're making a point. If they're tired, it might be a little different once again. Let your characters be real character and let them dialogue like real people. Characters like real life people do not always answer directly or on the nose. So allow some of that dialogue to be a little bit oblique. Let me give an example. Let me think of one. No, nothing's coming directly to my mind, but I'm sure you can think of some. If someone asks how they are, you don't always come right back. Even sometimes, and I notice this when I'm working, if I ask somebody, if I say hi, how are you, they might just dive right into um, what they imagine without even listening. Characters may not be listening, just like people don't always listen. If you say hello, how are you, how's your day, the person might not really answer your question, but might say something that is parallel to what you said because they have this um, kind of a overused, you know, um, going out running errands kind of dialogue going on in their brains. So they sort of, sometimes you may have noticed this when you're out and about with people. Sometimes people just assume they know what you're talking and they're not really answering you. Our characters are permitted to do exactly the same thing. Okay, here's one that's really important, and that's dialogue reveals emotional beats and the dynamics of the characters. I'd like to flesh that out again too. That's another one. I'd like to flesh that out at some later point in another dialogue related video. But for purposes of just reviewing, I'm just going to be quite a bit more brief. The use of slang can be used freely and appropriately. You don't really want your characters to sound like they're not um, intelligent enough to use uh, common language. Slang isn't always used, it's not appropriate for every character, and it's not appropriate in every scene, but it's got to be, again, it's natural. Dialogue can also be used to throw in a bit of foreshadowing as well. Um, an example comes to my mind, something along the lines of, let's say that you're writing a book about a hurricane. At some point, your characters might be discussing some previously bad storm they had last winter or last summer as a foreshadow. Um, and that's really all I have. This has just been an overview of the importance of these main things that go into dialogue. Um, like I said, I'm probably going to dive into a longer, in-depth video later on, but for now, um, this has been kind of fun for me because I'm taking these things and I'm reviewing them and I'm adding to the depth of my knowledge on these subjects too as I'm writing uh, my first fiction. I've written fiction before, but this is my first full length novel length book. My previous works have been self-help, inspirational. I've even written Bible studies. But as far as actually writing um, fiction, I've written um, stories where I took great liberties with the events, and so not everything that I wrote about that was truth. It conveyed the truth of what that experience was without being on the nose and blow by blow. But that is different. A fictionalized retelling of events is a lot different than actually writing a complete work of fiction where the characters are not real and the places are not real and none of the events happen, although they could have. So I've been studying this deeper myself for my own purposes and bringing you all along for the ride. So I hope that this has been encouraging to you if you're writing, and I look forward to bringing you more content like this. Until then, have a great one.